Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to read the next bit, see how far we go. This is Esio Trot by Roald Dahl. I'm reading it for entertainment and pleasure. This is all Roald Dahl's own work. Let's get going. It took him 2 days to visit each pet shop and choose his tortoises. He wanted a great many, at least 100, perhaps more, and he had to choose them very carefully. To you and me, there is not much difference between one tortoise and another. They differ only in their size and in the colour of their shells. Alfie had a darkish shell, so Mr. Hoppy chose only the darker shelled tortoises for his great collection. Size, of course, was everything. Mr. Hoppy chose all sorts of different sizes, some weighing only slightly more than Alfie's 13 ounces, others a great deal more, but he didn't want any that weighed less. Feed them cabbage leaves, the pet shop owners told him. That's all they need, and a bowl of water. Then he had finished. Mr. Hoppier's enthusiasm had bought no less than 140 tortoises, and he carried them home in baskets, 10 or 15 at a time. He had to make lots of trips, and he was quite exhausted at the end of it all. But it was worth it. Boy, was it worth it! And what an amazing sight his living room was, when they were all in there together. The floor was swarming with tortoises of different sizes, some walking slowly about and exploring, some munching cabbage leaves, others drinking water from a big shallow dish. They made just the faintest rustling sound as they moved over the canvas sheets. That was all. Mr. Hoppy had to pick his way carefully on his toes between the moving sea of brown shells whenever he walked across the room. But enough of that, he must get on with the job. Before he retired, Mr. Hoppy had been a mechanic in a bus garage, and now he went back to his old place of work and asked his mates if he might use his old bench for an hour or two. What he had to do now was to make something that would reach down from his own balcony to Mrs. Silver's balcony and pick up a tortoise. This was not difficult for a mechanic like Mr. Hoppy. First he made 2 metal claws or fingers, and these he attached to the end of a long metal tube. He ran 2 stiff wires down inside the tube and connected them to the metal claws in such a way that when you pulled the wires, the claws closed, and when you pushed them, the claws opened. The wires were joined to a handle at the other end of the tube. It was all very simple. Mr. Hoppy was ready to begin. Mrs. Silver had a part-time job. She worked from noon until 5 o'clock every weekday afternoon in a shop that sold newspapers and sweets. That made things a lot easier for Mr. Hoppy. So on that first exciting afternoon, after he had made sure that Mrs. Silver had gone to work, Mr. Hoppy went out on his balcony, armed with a long metal pole. He called this his tortoise catcher. He leaned over the balcony railings and lowered the pole down onto Mrs. Silver's balcony below. Alfie was basking in the pale sunlight over to one side. "Hello, Alfie," Mr. Hoppy said. "You're about to go for a little ride." He wheeled the tortoise catcher till it was right above Alfie. He pushed the hand lever so that the claws opened wide. Then he lowered the 2 claws neatly over Alfie's shell and pulled the lever. The claws closed tightly over the shell like 2 fingers of a hand. He hauled Alfie up onto his own balcony. It was easy. Mr. Hoppy weighed Alfie on his own kitchen scales just to make sure that Mrs. Silver's figure of 13 ounces was correct. It was. Now holding Alfie on one hand, he picked his way carefully through the huge collection of tortoises to find one that first of all had the same colour shell of Alfie's, and secondly weighed exactly 2 ounces more. 2 ounces is not much. It is less than a smallish hen egg weighs. But you see, the important thing in Mr. Hoppy's plan was to make sure that the new tortoise was bigger than Alfie, but only a tiny bit bigger. The difference had to be so small that Mrs. Silver wouldn't notice it. From his vast collection, it was not difficult for Mr. Hoppy to find the tortoise he wanted. He wanted one that weighed 15 ounces exactly on his kitchen scales. No more, no less. When he got it, he put it on the kitchen table beside Alfie, and even when he couldn't hardly tell that one was bigger than the other, but it was bigger. It was bigger by 2 ounces. This was tortoise number 2. Mr. Hoppy took tortoise number 2 out onto the balcony and gripped it in the claws of his tortoise catcher. Then he lowered it onto Mrs. Silver's balcony, right beside a nice fresh lettuce. Tortoise number 2 had never eaten tender juicy lettuce leaves before. It only had thick old cabbage leaves. It loved the lettuce and started chomping away at it with great gusto. There followed a rather nervous 2 hours wait for Mrs. Silver to return from work. Would she see any difference between the new tortoise and Alfie? It was going to be a tense moment. Out onto her balcony she swept Mrs. Silver. Alfie, my darling, she cried out. Mummy's back. Have you missed me? Mr. Hoppy, peering over his railing, but well hidden between two potted plants, held his breath. The new tortoise was still chomping away at the lettuce. My, Alfie, you do seem hungry today, Mrs. Silver was saying. It must be Mr. Hoppy's magic words I've been whispering to you. Mr. Hoppy watched as Mrs. Silver picked the tortoise up and stroked his shell. Then she fished Mr. Hoppy's piece of paper out of her pocket, and holding the tortoise very close to her face, she whispered, reading from the paper. Esio Trot, teg regib, emok no, Esio Trot. Warpoo, Fupoo, Talpoo, Grapoo, Warpoo, Lewispoo, Erogpoo, Ersug, Futs, Plug, Tup, no, tap, Esio Trot, tup, no, tap, teg, no, elbow, bob, dog. Phew. Mr. Hoppy popped his head out of the foliage and called out, Good evening, Mrs. Silver. How is Alfie tonight? Oh, he's lovely, said Mrs. Silver said, looking up and beaming, and he's developing such an appetite. I've never seen him eat like this before. It must be the magic words. You never know, Mr. Hoppy said darkly. You never know. Mr. Hoppy waited 7 whole days before he made his next move. On the afternoon of the 7th day, when Mr. Silver was back at work, he lifted tortoise number 2 from the balcony below and brought it into his living room. Number 2 had weighed exactly 15 ounces. He must now find the one that weighed exactly 17 ounces, 2 ounces more. From his enormous collection, he easily found the 17-ounce tortoise, and once again he made sure the shells matched in colour. Then he lowered tortoise number 3 onto Mrs. Silver's balcony. As you would have guessed by now, Mr. Hoppy's secret was a very simple one. If a creature grows slowly enough, I mean very slowly indeed, then you'll never notice that it's grown at all, especially if you see it every day. It's the same with children. They're actually growing taller every week, but their mothers never notice until they grow out of their clothes. Slowly does it, Mr. Hoppy told himself. Don't hurry it. So this is how things went over the next 8 weeks. In the beginning, Alfie weighed 13 ounces. End of the first week, tortoise number 2 weighed 15 ounces. End of the second week, tortoise number 3 weighed 17 ounces. End of the third week, tortoise number 4 weighed 19 ounces. End of fourth week, tortoise number 5 weighed 21 ounces. End of the fifth week, tortoise number 6 weighed 26 ounces. End of the sixth week, tortoise number 7 weighed 25 ounces. End of the seventh week, tortoise number 8 weighed 27 ounces. Alfie's weight was 13 ounces. Tortoise number 8 was 27 ounces. Very slowly, over 7 weeks, Mrs. Silver's pet had more than doubled in size, and the good lady hadn't noticed a thing. Even to Mr. Hoppy, peering down over his railing, tortoise number 8 looked pretty big. It was amazing that Mrs. Silver had hardly noticed anything at all during the great operation. Only once she looked up and said, You know, Mr. Hoppy, I do believe he's getting a bit bigger. What do you think? I can see a lot of difference myself, Mr. Hoppy had answered casually. But now perhaps it was time to call a halt, and that evening Mr. Hoppy was just about to go out and suggest to Mrs. Silver that she ought to weigh Alfie, when a startled cry came from the balcony below, brought him outside fast. Look, Mrs. Silver was shouting, Alfie's too big to get through the door of his little house. He must have grown enormously. Weigh him, Mr. Hoppy ordered. Take him and weigh him quick. I'm going to pause there, guys, and then I will finish off, hopefully tomorrow, but we'll see how we go. Thank you again for listening to the story. Really appreciate your love and kindness. Let me know what you want me to read in the comments below, by the way, because this will be finished tomorrow, so you can let me know what you want to do next. Anyway, thank you for listening, guys. Goodbye.